I think we'll probably get cracking. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Nikki, and we have Terry on here as well, who is our agronomist who looks after our cropping in the New South Wales region. So as all of you know, IF is on a mission to educate and connect those living in towns and cities about where their food and fibre comes from and how it is produced, all while financially backing our farmers. So as I said, my name is Nikki and I work with your livestock and your cropping trades. So a little bit about me. Agriculture has been woven into my life for as long as I can remember. Just flick my PowerPoint here. Here's a few little pictures of me sitting in a tractor. So from being the dorky ag kid at school in the sheep showing team to riding horses to the milk bar on the weekends to get hot chippies and sitting on the tractor with my dad, my childhood revolved around the land. That love turned into my career. I went on to work on cattle and cropping farms all over Australia before completing my Bachelor's of Agricultural Business at Marcus Oldham College, and finally ending up here at IF. So my passion for Australian agriculture runs very deep, and I'm very thankful that I get to work with IF and get to work with good farming businesses that not only have good investment potential, but essentially they help feed our nation and the world. So I'll just flick onto the next slide. So this is a picture of a wheat crop. So in Australia, we grow winter crops and summer crops. And this actually refers to the particular time of the year that crop is sown and grown. So farmers carefully time sowing based on rainfall, soil moisture, frost risk, and market demand, ensuring the best conditions for a successful harvest. Winter crops like wheat, barley, canola, and lentils are sown between March to April across Western Australia, South Australia, Victoria, and New South Wales, and southern Queensland. So these crops rely on winter rainfall and are harvested from around October to December. Summer crops, including sorghum, cotton, and sunflowers, are sown from September to December in northern New South, some parts of Queensland, and actually some parts of the Northern Territory. So they benefit from summer rainfall and are often harvested between March and April. So I will just add that crops, depending on the season, can be sown sort of in different times of the year. These are sort of mostly when they're sown. So most crops grown in Australia are dry land, meaning they rely on rainfall to grow. However, we do have some irrigation in Australia, which means similar to your lawn, we actually water the crop. So this can be done with a big pivot. And a pivot irrigator is, you'll have seen them before, they sort of go over the top of the paddock and they can crawl along the paddock. So they can also be flood irrigated out of an irrigation channel. And they can be irrigated with like a giant sprinkler, so just like in your garden. So in Australia, the main crops that we produce are winter crops, being wheat, barley, canola, and oats. But wheat has consistently been the most produced grain in Australia. Australia is one of the world's largest wheat exporters, with wheat production primarily concentrated in southern Western Australia, southern, central, and some parts of northern New South Wales, south and southeastern South Australia, and throughout Victoria. Wheat is a staple crop used for both domestic consumption and export, with key markets including Indonesia, China, and Japan. 36 million tonnes of wheat was actually produced in 2024. I'll flick over. So at IF, safeguarding our investors means making informed decisions. By the time a trade actually gets to your app, I have probably talked to that farmer more than I've talked to my own family. I probably know what they had for brekkie, what their dog's name is, and what type of tractor they drive. But we also work with industry experts, and in cropping, this means working with an agronomist like Terry. So an agronomist is like a doctor and a nutritionist all in one for your crop. They specialise in soil health, crop management, and sustainable farming. Their expertise helps us assess risk, optimise yields, and ensure investments are grounded in sound science. Agronomists play a vital role in modern farming, guiding growers on fertilisation, crop selection, pest management, and conservation. Their insights not only improve productivity, but also support long-term sustainability, ensuring Australian agriculture remains resilient and profitable. Now, I am going to stop talking and actually just hand over to Terry, because Terry's our expert today. So Terry's actually a very successful agronomist from New South Wales, just north of Wagga Wagga. So he also runs his own farm, so I don't know how he finds time. But you're actually going to see some of his crops become available in our app in the coming few days. So keep an eye out. You will see his crops, and I'm going to hand over.
Thank you, Nikki, and good afternoon, everyone who's on this webinar. As Nikki said, I'm an agronomist. I've been in my current role for about 24 years now, and we've also got a farming operation ourselves where we're running livestock and cropping. So I think it keeps it real, that you can be talking to clients about what you're actually doing. They can see that you're doing it, and it sort of probably puts a bit more credibility. Well, I think it gives you a good background into what you're advising on doing. So Nikki's asked me to get involved and help give you guys an idea of what an agronomist's role is and what they play throughout the season with the grower. So typically, the role, I think it's a 12-month role, because even though we're planting the crop in April, March, May, in around that period, depending on varieties and the commodity that we're growing, there's a lot of background planning. We're flat out at the moment just doing all our paddock plans for our growers. So you've got to be taking into account the crops that have been growing last year, the herbicides that have been used, what the nutritional status of the paddock is, any soil health issues where it needs lime to increase the pH and things like that. So that's all occurring from the end of harvest last year right through to now, where we've got our plans in place for what we're growing this year. We need to be looking at our weed control options to maximise the growth of the crop without having competing weeds there. We've got to aim to have the right fertiliser balance. We don't want to be putting out too much fertiliser and causing environmental issues, but also causing financial issues. So we're just really trying to target the right fertiliser program. Timing is everything. Making sure that we're sowing on time, spraying on time, getting fertiliser out in front of rain events. And throughout the summer, management of the paddocks is very important. If we do get rainfall, we need to minimise what weeds are growing there, so we can maximise the moisture that we can hold in the ground that allows us to grow a crop. And it just being involved throughout the whole year, knowing what's happening in the region, that might give you a bit of a heads up as to what we're going to face here in the way of insects, diseases, all those sorts of things. So I see it as being a year-round sort of role. Part of the planning, is working out costs and returns and risk and reward, and talking to growers about what commodities we should be growing and what the outlook for certain crops is going to be. And that's keeping a bit of an idea on the markets. Don't try and be an expert in what you don't fully know, but there's information there that you can utilise to help growers. So I feel it's important for IF and yourselves as investors to know that the growers are using qualified people to help make the appropriate steps that are going to allow you to maximise your returns in a strategic way and give you the best chance of returning a profit from your investment into agriculture. Nikki just wanted me to say where our environment is at the moment and what the outlook for the season is. At the moment, I'd say if we're looking out the window, we're looking pretty dry, but that's pretty normal for us here. We are a pretty average 12-month rainfall event, about 475 mils, which that falls consistently across the 12 months. But summertime, we don't often see a lot of green unless we've had a lot of summer rain, which we probably did back in December. We had, quite significant rainfalls, which we've been able to manage our paddocks very well, and hopefully stored a lot of that moisture away in the ground that we can utilise, come through this winter cropping season. And in the last 3 weeks, we've had some storms that have floated through. So anywhere from 15 mils to 80, just depending where those storms have passed through. So yeah, it's topped the moisture profile back up again. And as Nikki said, we typically sow in that April, May, March period, just depending on what we're putting in and when that break actually comes. Harvest November to December, and sell our grain throughout December through to March the following year to help manage cash flow. Broadacre farming does have some risks involved, but outside of the environment, I believe many of those risks can be managed, and that's dealing with qualified people, dealing with growers that are able to get the job done. Having some diversification in crop types can certainly help manage the risk in longer term view, and sometimes they really need to be considered. So Nikki's told me that there was a couple of investments they done last year that probably didn't play out the way that they would have liked. And looking back at some of that, there's certainly been some management issues around throughout the year, and we would hope that having the right people on board would help guide that and make sure that didn't happen again. But we also did suffer probably 2 severe frosts last year, which talking to a lot of other growers around, probably had not seen for 40 to 50 years. So they were certainly one out of the box, to say. And that is part of the environment that, probably no matter what you're doing, that's always a bit of a risk that we can't control. In saying that, people last year that were good operators, whether it was luck or just whether it's come back to management, not to say they weren't affected by the frosts, but some of their impacts were less. So overall, I feel we're in a relatively safe environment, and agriculture is an exciting industry to be in. It's the base of all our food stocks and a driver to so much of our rural areas. So it's something I'm very passionate about, and looked at being involved in for a long time yet, throughout my career. And I think this is an exciting opportunity for IF, and you guys as investors in the when you see you want to invest into agriculture. I did have a couple of questions that had come through, and I might just answer them now for the people online. There was one question about crops have had a tough time recently. So I'm not sure what environment that was in regard to, but if I just talk about our region throughout here, our last 3 or 4 or 5 years have actually been pretty good. Last year, yes, we had 2 severe frosts, which, later in the year, which certainly had a huge impact. But topography and crop types planted did play a bit of a role. And, canola probably itself was hit hardest, but our cereal crops, our barley and wheat, come through quite good. And at the end of the day, probably were above average crops. So again, management played a bit of a role in that, but sometimes the environment's out of our control. And I did have another question there about sowing oats into perennial pastures. So often, our perennial pastures that we generally deal with here are lucerne based. So they do lucerne does grow through winter, but you get summer rain and it thrives. But to bulk up feed and to match stock needs and produce more bulk throughout that winter period, we often do sow oats into those paddocks. One, it bulks up more feed, but two, it also opens the ground up a bit to allow more water to infiltrate the soil. Pros and cons. The cons are, well, it's not cons. It's if you've got weeds, other weeds, grass weeds in there, it can just make the oats a little bit less competitive. But the pros are better feed quality for livestock, more feed bulk, and more water infiltration into the profile. And generally sowing oats about 50 kilos a hectare into that scenario. Is there any other questions, Nikki, that had bounced up?
Yeah, look, I reckon would you be able to walk us through, so when you start working with, for example, an if farmer, where do you start with them? So, you've been meeting with a few of our clients recently, and what is your starting point? And how do you make the plans for the coming year?
The starting point is, just talking to them to get a bit of a background about what their system's been, what their rotations have been, and what their goal is, throughout the next year, what they're wanting to grow. And then you also got to, once you find that out, you've got to make sure that looking back at their history, looking back at what they've done last year, but there's nothing there that's going to limit them going forward. There's no herbicide residues left in the soil that are going to affect a certain crop, that the soil type is suitable for what they want to do, and just making sure that you think they're going to have the management skills to make that happen and to grow a crop. So that's when you first sit down to get a bit of an idea, and then once we progress forward, it's regular contact, making sure they're getting stuff done on time, making sure they've got the information that they need to make the right decisions.
And in a crop, I suppose, obviously, people understand that you plant a seed, it grows, and then you can, if some people might grow tomatoes in their back garden, they harvest their tomatoes. So what about during that process, once the seeds are sown, what special things do you have to do during the crop?
Once they've got the planting operation underway, it's always nice to duck around the crop, depending on when it is sown and the soil temperatures, and it can be up within 5 to 7 days, but as you get later in the season, it may take 2 to 3 weeks to come up. But it's pretty important to get around to make sure that you've got a good establishment to start with. If you don't have a good plant population, that crop may struggle throughout the rest of the year, no matter what else you do. So it's just making sure that that's done. It's making sure that there's not a lot of weeds there that are going to compete against the crop. And then it's keeping an eye on insects, diseases later in the year, and ensuring that, if it looks like we need to apply more fertiliser, we get that done on a timely basis.
And when you talk about timing, how specific does that timing have to be? Are we talking within days, or does it need to be within that month, or how specific is that timing?
Often it's within, the next couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
We all understand that nothing can just happen bang tomorrow. So that's why I guess we've got to be ahead of the game a little bit. But certainly sometimes with fertiliser applications, if we see a rainfall event coming through, and it's when we're applying nitrogen, it's probably very important to get our timing right, that we get that in front of a rainfall event to wash that into the ground. Things like that we need to be pretty critical on, and that could be a matter of days. Mm-hmm. And there could be other scenarios where in the next 2 or 3 weeks, if we're looking at things early enough, we've got time to make those decisions.
Yeah, cool. No, thank you, Terry. I'll jump. We did have another couple of questions come through. So one was regarding crop selection. Colin Gowan actually sent us a question regarding his notice that in his area there's been less canola planted. And so on that is difficult to answer because we don't necessarily know exactly what area he's in. But I sort of did have a think that if it does seem like there's less canola being sown, there could be obviously a multitude of reasons, but one that I could put my finger on is that last year was a very, very sort of not difficult, but there was some challenges in the cropping sector, and canola is quite a high value crop. Therefore, it's quite expensive to grow. So farmers might be feeling the pinch on that and just wanting to limit that financial outlay. So that could be one of the reasons, and there could also be many other reasons in that maybe they haven't had a successful canola crop. Or do you have anything to add on there, Terry?
No, you've covered it pretty well there, Nikki. There's canola is something that you'd like to go into the season and knowing that you've got some subsoil moisture stored. It is a riskier crop, there's no doubt about that, but at the same time, it's an extremely important crop to our farming systems. It allows us to clean up weeds in a way that we can't when we're growing wheat and barley. So, it is extremely important. Our environment, our region here is always pretty consistent. You might be up and down 5 or 10% on a yearly basis. But if you get to more marginal areas, it certainly does become a higher risk crop. And the inputs, sometimes on a gross margin look higher on a canola because some of the soil ameliorants you put out, such as lime, often appear to be on that gross margin for the canola crop, but the benefits of that, are prolonged over the next 5 or 6 years. So that's often why you've got to look at a longer term view with gross margins and, some agricultural commodities.
Thank you. We had a question from Thomas Barker regarding how we actually secure your investment. So I'll just touch on that. IF actually holds title of the resulting grain or crop. Therefore, they own that. And the farmer has the obligation to grow it. So you can't actually put, for example, a PPSR on something that you own. And we actually own the crop. We buy it off the farmer, and we own that crop for the season. So we do have a PPSR over the farming practices of the farmer, but we actually own that crop. So that's where our safeguarding comes in, I suppose. And I think that sort of sums it up. I think we've discussed the ins and outs of cropping, and I hope we have managed to explain how intricate and how many inputs and how much thought goes into these investments and into the crops that we grow. And we hope that we can bring you some really exciting cropping trades in the coming months, and we hope that you're as keen as we are to invest into Australian agriculture.